Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillahi wa ba'd. Esteemed program director, honorable asatidha and graduates, respected brothers, sisters, listeners and viewers. Many people opine and give some personal perspective in terms of their own understanding of the world that we live in today. If you were to pose that question to me, and if I were to venture a possible answer, I would say that if we have to analyze the world that we live in today, then we live in a world that is highly polarized, highly vocal, highly volatile, highly networked and connected. That's the world that we live in. The people that occupy the planet, they are distracted, entitled, have a very little sense of duty, have many options on who to follow, and have little to no patience. Without elaborating, that is just to give you a sketch, to paint a picture of the environment in which the scholars and the ulama have to fulfill their duty, responsibility and obligation. And what I want to share with you this afternoon is not only thoughts that are relevant to ulama, but ulama can only thrive in a conducive climate, in an adequate environment. So the business community, the professional community, the family structure of the scholars, everyone has to play their respective part adequately in order for us to thrive as an ummah, and in order for the scholars to optimize the knowledge and the opportunity which Allah Tabaraka wa Ta'ala has given them. So let me start off with a reminder. When you're speaking to graduating ulama and you're speaking to scholars, there's no need to go into too much of detail with regards to the virtues of knowledge, but the Quran tells us that a reminder is beneficial. So we are aware of the virtues and the benefits highlighted in the Quran, emphasized in the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam with regards the virtue of pursuing knowledge, being a student of knowledge, being a scholar of deen. But the simple reality is this, that there is no other religion. There is no other religion that has placed this much emphasis on the pursuit of knowledge, the preservation of knowledge, the dissemination of knowledge, and the implementation of knowledge like Islam has. No other religion. The Quran is replete with verses. شهد الله أنه لا إله إلا هو والملائكة وأولو العلم قائما بالقسط يرفع الله الذين آمنوا منكم والذين أوتوا العلم درجات هل يستوي الذين يعلمون والذين لا يعلمون إنما يخشى الله من عباده العلماء ومن عنده علم الكتاب وقال الذين أوتوا العلم وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس وما يعقلها إلا العالمون. Verses upon verses upon verses. When Allah talks in the Quran about personalities, the greatest personalities are the Anbiya alayhimus salatu wassalam. And you see Allah consistently linking them to this institution of knowledge. وَعَلَّمَ آدَمَ الْأَسْمَاءِ, which is when Adam alayhi salam was privileged with knowledge that he became worthy of the angels prostrating before him. وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ صَنْعَةَ لَبُوسٍ لَكُمْ. Dawud alayhi salatu wasalam was taught by Allah the art of manufacturing armor. عَلِّمْنَا مَنْطِقَ الطَّيْرِ. Sulaimaan alayhi salatu wasalam was given the knowledge of how to interact with birds. آتَيْنَاهُ حُكْمًا وَعِلْمًا. Yusuf alayhi salatu wasalam. وَيُعَلِّمُكَ مِنْ تَأْوِيلِ الْأَحَادِيثِ وَيُعَلِّمُهُ الْكِتَابَ وَالْحِكْمَةَ وَالتَّوْرَاةَ وَالْإِنْجِيلِ. Isa alayhi salatu wasalam. وَعَلَّمْنَاهُ مِنْ لَدُنَّا عِلْمًا. Khadir. وَعَلَّمَكَ مَا لَمْ تَكُنْ تَعْلَمْ. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. There's no need in a gathering like this for me to translate or elaborate. Like I say, it's just a reminder. We did not come here, we were brought here. We did not choose, Allah had chosen. So, after having painted a picture for you about the kind of landscape that scholars have to, fulfill their obligations within, let me take the point to another aspect, and that is the fundamentals for a scholar, for an alim, will always remain the same. No matter what happens in the environment within which you exist, and no matter how times may change or circumstances may vary, the fundamentals will always remain the same. However, a changing environment requires a change in three things. One, a change in your technique. Two, a change in your mindset. And three, a change in your approach. You cannot use the same methods. The fundamentals will be the same. The methods need to vary. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَا مِن رَسُولٍ إِلَّا بِلِسَانِ قَوْمِهِ. Why did Allah send a prophet who could speak the language of the nation? Because that would create the connection. That's where the resonance would come from. Evolving circumstances would require an evolving mindset. Changing environments would require modification of approach. Time doesn't allow me, but this is enshrined in the Sunnah. It is enshrined in the legacy of the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam. Every Nabi was sent with a miracle that was relevant to the issue of his time. Musa alayhi salam defeated the magicians, not the doctors. Isa alayhi salam overshadowed the doctors, not the magicians. The Quran made the poets totally incapacitated. So the Quran itself, the legacy and the seerah and the sunnah of the Anbiya alayhi salatu wasalam highlight to us that changing your approach, your methodology, your technique, and your mindset and approach is not against the Sharia, it's in conformance to the Sharia. It is a strategy enshrined by Allah for the men of Allah. There is a fundamental point. So, what I want to share with you is a combination of that which will never change, fundamental values, and a little bit of that which, in my humble opinion, is relevant to the contemporary environment within which we exist. So first and foremost, like what most hadith kitabs, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ, you cannot emphasize this adequately. The thing with ikhlas, it's not a once-off that you can accomplish. It's something that you have to constantly work at, but you're still vulnerable. You always remain vulnerable, because Allah doesn't say, I reward you instantly. Allah says, مَنْ جَاءَ بِالْحَسَنَةِ فَلَهُ عَشْرُ أَمْثَالِهَا. You do the good deed, you preserve the good deed, then if you can present it intact on the day of Qiyamah, you become eligible for the reward. If you look at the legacy of our scholars, it was constant obsession with ikhlas, obsession with ikhlas and sincerity. I mean, the examples are many. I was reading recently, normally what will happen is that if you praise someone in his presence, he immediately responds and tries to downplay it, right? So if someone says, hey, mashallah, he reads very beautifully, he's an excellent qari, he's a wonderful hafiz. Say, no, man, I'm just a simple person. Nothing really, you're exaggerating. So there was one alim, whenever someone would praise him in his presence, he would keep quiet. So one day his student asked him and said, Hazrat Sheikh, your silence gives the impression that you're enjoying being praised. Whereas if you try to downplay it, it makes it obvious that, you don't consider yourself in terms of what they're saying you are. So he said, no. When you downplay it, what happens? The person reiterates what he said with more emphasis. So if you say, he reads beautifully, and that person says, no, not really. He said, you're the best reciter in Birmingham, man. So your downplaying it is actually meant to prompt it to say it a second time, to say it louder and clearer so that everyone can hear it. That goes contrary to ikhlas. He said, that's why I keep quiet. That's why I keep quiet. So in the end, alim or not, we're all Muslims. It's not what you do or how much you do it, it's the intention with which you did it. And that's why every muhaddith says, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Whether you're reading my book, you're studying my book, you're learning my book, you're teaching my book, you're publishing my book, you're printing my book, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Constantly be obsessed with your intention. Today we are obsessed in judging the intention of others. If only we could be half as obsessed with our own intention, we'd find very little time to worry about others. That is what counts at the end of the day. And the barometer there is known only to Allah. There are signs, obviously, but it's a discussion all on its own. So that's a fundamental. As an alim and as a Muslim, no matter where you live, in which age you live, in which environment you live, in which circumstances you live, ikhlas is pivotal. And from ikhlas flows taqwa. إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Look, I mean, in terms of ayat pertaining to taqwa, in terms of ahadith, in terms of the sayings of the scholars, you probably know more than what I can. But let me say this much to you when it comes to the aspect of taqwa. That in the midst of moral degeneration, in the midst of a second jahiliyyah that we live in today, taqwa is all the more important for a scholar in order for him to be a beacon of light for the masses. You cannot show the beauty of Islam to Muslims and non-Muslims alike if you yourself have not imbibed the beauty of Islam within your own heart and soul. That's what taqwa is today. And that's why that should be the area on which you focus the most. My ikhlas, my own taqwa. Like salah requires external purification, ilm requires internal purification. That you constantly check your niyyah and you constantly check your taqwa. And that is what creates the nur of ilm. That is what creates the nur of ilm. The second thing is that flows from taqwa is, like I said, we live in a very fast-paced, distracted world. In this fast-paced, distracted world where everything is moving at breakneck speed, you must not be distracted and compromised in your own a'mal and your own relationship with Allah. That's a fundamental. It will always remain a fundamental. See, no one was busier than Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam. No one had a greater task and responsibility than Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But Allah said, فَإِذَا فَرَغْتَ فَانْصَبْ وَإِلَىٰ رَبِّكَ فَارْغَبْ. Yes, there are indirect forms of ibadat and worship, and all the work that we do, teaching and imamat and whatever else is indirectly ibadah. But those direct forms of worship is what carries the spirituality. That ta'alluq with Allah tabaraka wa ta'ala. Bringing amal into your own life. When Musa alayhi salam was leaving Khadir, after repeatedly telling him, I won't question and then questioning, he said, "Oh, give me a parting piece of advice." And Khadir said to him, "Don't seek knowledge to disseminate, seek knowledge to practice." Allah. When you practice upon your knowledge, dissemination will kick in automatically. You won't have to open your mouth, your actions will talk a language. Your actions will talk a language. I was reading recently in some article of Sheikh Awama. He says that there was a scholar. The mother came to him and said, "Sheikh, you teach my son in madrasa. He eats too much sweets. Hey, I wish we had that problem today." That is like, on the scale of problems. I've got 5 kids, alhamdulillah, all boys. All boys. When they on song, I go for a long drive. So my eldest is 21 and my youngest is 3. You can understand the spectrum with which I'm dealing. And 21's got his own dimensions. He's also becoming an alim. And the 3-year-old is like, you've got to, your mode as a father, you've got to have a switch from one end of the spectrum to the other end of the spectrum. And boys are boys, as they say. Girls are a bit easier to deal with, especially when they're growing up. So, in terms of the scale of problems that a parent can have, when someone comes to the teacher and says, "My kid is eating too much of sweets," you're like, really, is that an issue? But for this mother, it was. So the sheikh said, "Okay, I'll see to it. I'll see to it." Some weeks lapsed and she came back and she said, "Sheikh, you haven't yet told him anything, If you say something, he listens. He's not listening to me." So he said, "I'll see to it." And after a while, then he spoke to the kid, and the kid, listened, and he didn't indulge as much in sweets. So the mother was curious and she said, "Sheikh, why? I mean, such a simple thing, right? It's not like I asked you to prepare a treatise on something. So I asked you to have a word with him that he consumes too much of sweets." He said, "Listen, I had the same weakness. So I thought to myself, until I don't fix my own action, my words are going to fall on deaf ears if I have to tell him anything." Allah. My words are going to fall on deaf. These are the fundamental ingredients for success as a Muslim. And even more fundamental for success as an alim. So your niyyah in a PR obsessed world today is all about likes and hits. And I'm not saying that you've got to shun that altogether. Today, if you run an institution and you don't promote what you're doing, you're not going to get funding. You're not going to get funding. You're not going to be able to draw in the talent in terms of teachers and resources. You don't get that, you're not going to be able to produce the product. It's a simple reality of the world that we live in. But because of the nature of how we have to publicize what we do, everything is recorded, everything is amplified, everything is distributed, everything is disseminated. All the more important now for us to obsessively guard our niyyah and guard our actions, guard our intentions. Interrogate yourself all the time that what is the level of my relationship with Allah. I was saying yesterday in the Jummah talk that the ummah today is crying for unity. No matter where you go in the world and who you speak to, which ideological background or which profession, everyone is saying unity, unity, unity. Where does unity come from? We are all looking for unity to come from the top, from global leaders. The system of Allah is unity comes from the bottom up. When you're united in your marriages, then you have united families. When you have united families, you have united communities. When you have united communities, you have a united ummah. If you can't be united with fellow scholars, if two imams in one masjid are not united, if two ulama in one locality are not united, let's not criticize the global leaders. They will have to answer for their shortcomings to Allah. But unity is not going to flow from the top down. Unity is to spring from the bottom up. Unity is a bounty of Allah. And Allah says, وَأَلَّفَ بَيْنَ قُلُوبِهِمْ. I am the one who unites hearts. The stronger your taqwa, the greater the likelihood of Allah uniting your hearts. Without taqwa in the ummah, there will be no unity. So ulama have a responsibility to develop their own spiritual capacity and to develop the spiritual capacity of the ummah. Because without that taqwa, which the Quran repeatedly speaks about, we don't have the foundation for material or spiritual prosperity. We don't have the foundation for success in this world as well as in the after. So that is another fundamental that will never change, no matter in which era you live in. You've got to take care of your spirituality. You know, in English they say, when the mud is thick, even the elephant will slip. It's so sad that so many ulama have lost their decades of effort as a result of succumbing to the temptation of either money or the opposite sex. You see, today it's all about the celebrity sheikh, right? You can become a hero instantly, but you can become a zero just so quickly. That very platform that built you overnight, that very platform that built your profile overnight will be used to destroy your profile in seconds. People today are losing their jobs because of one tweet, because of one post on social media. Look after your spirituality and your integrity. 40 years Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam's integrity was being established. As-Sadiqul Amin. Then Nubuwwah came. Then revelation came. Your integrity is what you require. Without it, nothing. Your istidad, your talent will mean nothing. So we live in a world where people will build you overnight and they'll drop you overnight. That's the nature of the world that we live in today. We love to prop people up more than what they deserve. And one small mistake and error and we drop that person down. Comes down crashing like a house of cards. So when the mud is thick, even the elephant will slip. And average person succumbs to the temptation of the opposite gender or money. It's colossal. When an alim succumbs, an entire community can be lost. You know why? Because people's faith in scholars is then shaken, broken. It's a different matter whether they should be having blind faith in ulama, and that ulama are also humans at the end of the day. They're not prophets. They're not protected from sin. However, اتقوا مواضع التهم. As far as possible, try to avoid or minimize the possibility of anyone else being able to lift a finger in your direction. You see, we live in the era of the brand. It's all about the brand today. What's your online brand? Your reputation can be built or shattered very quickly. Your followers are very fickle. Today they're with you, tomorrow they're gone. Today you're earning money from your YouTube channel, tomorrow they've blocked you. Your persona non grata. Today when you just put out an announcement, it's this alim's talk, masses gather in the multitudes. The next day no one wants to even open the door when you come knocking, because your brand has been tarnished. Look after your integrity. Don't be seen as a careerist. I am a big believer that we must do the khidmah of deen in a very professional way. Institutes must be run according to those business principles that will serve the interests of the institutes, because that's the era that we live in. But it's a very fine line between remaining sincere that I'm a khadim of deen and becoming a careerist. It's really hurtful when you hear people of wealth and influence say, this is my Maulvi. Back home I heard one person say to another person, both of them very, mashallah, blessed when it comes to wealth. And two alims were bickering. The one had a relationship with the one businessman, the other one had a relationship with the other businessman. So at the table on the walima, the one says to the other, put your dog on a leash and I'll put my dog on a leash. La ilaha illallah. Don't sell yourself. Work with everyone, respect everyone. Wealth is not a problem. The wealthy have a role to play in society. Uthman radiallahu anhu was wealthy. But do not pander after wealth. Do not build relationships based on people's financial status. Musalli shouldn't feel that I have to have a hefty bank balance to get the attention of my imam. Ulama should protect the izzat and the reputation of the fraternity. Turf wars. I was saying yesterday in the Jummah talk where I was speaking about leadership. You see, we want the youth to rise. But youth look for role models. Ask any cricketer, any soccer player that's reached the top. He'll tell you he saw a person who he idolized and he aspired to become like that person. Today, we build our scholars and then we drop them either because they've made a mistake or we've perceived them to make a mistake. We delegitimize them, we demonize them, we cancel them, and then we expect the youth to have role models that they aspire to become like. Ain't gonna happen, they would say in the US. And who's guilty of it? Not the awam, us, scholars. There's a way of remedying a person's shortcoming constructively, and then there's a way of saying I want to remedy his shortcoming, but all that is at play is your own professional jealousy, and then it becomes destructive to the target and to the shooter. It becomes destructive to the target as well as to the shooter. So be careful in that regard. Moving on. I like this clock system because I'm a radio presenter. So we watch the clock all the time to know exactly when to take the ad break, and news has to be promptly at the top of the hour. So it helps me to regulate my own time. The third quality, which will never change, which is part of the fundamentals. So I'm sharing the fundamentals with you, but in between I'm bringing some pieces of advice which I feel is relevant to the society that we live in. Humility. Ikhlas, taqwa, humility. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi says, and this is nothing from my side. I mean, these sifat of the ulama is mentioned in Imam Ghazali's writings. That's what I'm taking from. So he says that the arrogance of knowledge is far worse than the arrogance of wealth. Because the consequences of arrogance that rooted in knowledge, the consequences of it are far more dire to the individual and to the community than that arrogance which is a result of a person's wealth or a person's talent or a person's expertise. Knowing what is right and wanting to be right all the time are two very distinct things. You know, I just cannot for the life of me understand that if a giant like Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Shafi used to say, and this is enshrined in our usul and our fiqh, I consider myself right with the possibility of being wrong, and I consider the other party to be wrong with the possibility of being right. How is it that we have developed this mindset, I am right, full stop, he is wrong, full stop? No benefit of the doubt, no willingness to engage, no willingness to hear the other side of the story, to try and understand that person's perspective. Then we want to say, we're going to liberate Aqsa. How? How? When I've just explained that unity starts from if you can't be united as scholars, you can't unite your congregation, كان يؤلف ولا يفرق. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam always tried to bring people better, closer, not distant them. We pour fuel on the fire because, he's from the other camp. So the more he is demonized and delegitimized, the better it is for my market share. I'm speaking like this because it's a scholarly gathering. Amongst awam, we don't want them to disrespect scholars, so we won't use this kind of terminology. But when you're speaking to your own, you've got to be somewhat more frank. So Moulana Madani Rahmatullah Alayhi used to intentionally do things to bring his ego into check and to create humility. He would intentionally go and clean the toilet. Today you don't use the toilet after the next person if there's a foul smell. He would say, no, let me go and clean it. I've got to keep my nafs in check. I've got to bring myself down a notch. Our esteemed MC spoke about one wife. They say there's no sheikh for an alim like his wife. So I have a friend back in South Africa. He's a world-renowned orator. He's probably graced Birmingham many times. So he tells me, Moulana, sometimes you go, you give a talk, and the adrenaline is pumping, the crowd is giving you support. You come off the stage, everyone is making wah, 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 wah. And you're on cloud 9, and after that, you come home, you walk through the door. Where's the bread and milk? You come crashing down. I don't care about what talk you gave there Jummah time and how many people enjoyed it. I told you to bring the bread and milk. So what I was trying to say, that if one wife is not adequate for your Islah, I didn't say anything further. And the sisters may be thinking, well, I better make an effort to make his Islah so that does not perceive any vacancy in terms of the Muslim. The other aspect of humility is that our scholars, our mashayikh always tell us there's a difference between qabiliyat and qabuliyat, talent and acceptance. And I'm not old, right? But alhamdulillah, I've been post-graduation now almost 20 years. And from my own class, it's not the ones who came first. It's not the ones who were the most talented. It's not the ones that we thought would go the furthest. It's the ones who were accepted by Allah. They were humble enough to make an effort to stay the course. They showed tenacity and Allah opened up for them. Sometimes when you've got too much of confidence in your own talent, all work is beneath you. Everyone is not on your standard and you just go roaming around in life from this institute to that institute, trying this, trying that. Nothing comes up to your lofty ideals. I'm not saying all talented people are like that. If you've got the talent and you come out first and you've got the ikhlas and you've got the humility, then nurun ala nur, then the sky is the limit in terms of what you can achieve. But if you want that qabuliyat, then work on your humility, work on your taqwa, work on your ikhlas. Today, the life coaches will use a fancy word and say servant leadership. I was saying yesterday in the Jummah talk, there's two things for which you need no qualification, but it looks very fancy on your CV. You can say I'm a political analyst or I'm a life coach. Every Muslim is a political analyst. If you listen to the Panchayat Jamaat outside the masjid or you go to any function, we've got a solution for the problem of every country. On Sunday, I was telling someone, I'm going to Moulana, let me tell you how they need to vote. You sitting here on the southern tip of Africa, you want to tell them how to vote. That's our attitude, right? We know everything and we have the solution for everything. So to be a political analyst, you don't need a qualification. If you're right, well and good. If you're wrong, there's no consequence. And life coach, whatever that means. Now you look at online profiles now, life coach. Well, I don't know what it means, but it just sounds fancy. But these life coaches, what they tell you, servant leadership. Servant leadership is enshrined in the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. What does servant leadership mean? It means love and care. وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. Allah spoke about the Anbiya that He spoke about in Surah Al-Anbiya in some detail. Entire ruku on Ibrahim alayhi salam. 3 ayat on Nuh alayhi salam. 2 ayat on Dawood and Sulaiman alayhi salam. When he comes to the greatest of prophets, one sentence, وَمَا أَرْسَلْنَاكَ إِلَّا رَحْمَةً لِلْعَالَمِينَ. In Tafsir al-Madhari, it's written, Rahmatul lil Alameen means Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam directly or indirectly was a means of mercy reaching everyone from his time up to the day of Qiyamah. Allahu Akbar. Am I a means of mercy? That's the question. The other aspect of servant leadership is empathy, tolerance. You check the definition of empathy, put yourself in your student's shoe. Put yourself in the position of your musalli. Put yourself in the position of the person asking you the question. That is when you will have empathy. So recently, last week in Durban by Mufti Zubair's places, we were addressing, we asked different professionals to address us. And I was, emceeing the function. So I had to tell him, listen, don't take your revenge for what we do on the Jummah Mimbar by taking extra time. But sometimes we get carried away. You're not putting yourself in that man's position. He's got a flight to catch. He's got an appointment. He's got a boss who's very finicky about what time he returns from his lunch break. Empathy is part of servant leadership. To be a servant leader, you need to constantly upskill yourself. In every profession, they're taking a break. They've to get credits every so often. They've got to go to seminars. They've got to go to workshops to upskill themselves. Why is it the scholars we can't learn new techniques, expose ourselves to new methodologies? Remember what I said up front. The fundamentals remain the same. But I've given you the examples from the Quran and Sunnah why methodology has to differ from era to era, where your techniques and approach have to differ. Otherwise, you're doing a disservice rather than a service of deen. So upskill yourself. Learn from others. One day a great scholar was asked, what's the secret to your success? He said, no matter who I meet, Muslim, non-Muslim, scholar, non-scholar, learned, not so learned, I tell myself I need to learn one thing from this person before I depart. Even if it's someone who's just merely sitting next to me on a plane seat. My interaction and engagement with him must leave me learning one thing from that person before I leave him. Upskill yourself. Administrative khidmah is something which ulama don't take as seriously as they should. To be in administrative positions, you see, it's very tedious. It's not as fulfilling as when you prepare for a lecture and you deliver the lecture, or you're a sheikh in a khanka, or you go out in the path of Allah, or you're doing imamah. It's not as stimulating. But if ulama are not at the backbone of these organizations, then how would they remain in alignment with the Quran and Sunnah? Someone's got to do it. Pursue excellence. We have sometimes this, if you're doing something for deen, just do it because it's for deen. You're doing something for your dunya, then you've got to do it properly. No. All the more important, whatever you do it to the best of your ability. Guard against laziness and mediocrity. What is laziness? If you don't do what you're supposed to do at the time you're supposed to do it, in the way you're supposed to do it, then that is laziness. I did a separate talk on laziness. I checked about 15 different definitions. This is what it boils down to. My own definition I'm giving you. If you don't do what you're supposed to do at the time you're supposed to do it, in the way you're supposed to do it, then that is laziness. Laziness is not only the guy who does nothing, absolutely nothing with his life. So they say there was the student. The teacher said, hey, but you're lazy, man. He said, no, sir, I'm not lazy. I'm highly motivated to do nothing. So now you're so lazy, even if they were to give you an award for laziness, you'll send somebody else to pick it up. Laziness, guard against that. Guard against that. So I've shared with you a few ingredients in terms of servant leadership. Right? Let me move on to the last point. And that is mutala'a. Remember, a scholar always remains a student. Every scholar is a student. Every student is not necessarily a scholar. And how will that happen? How will you upskill yourself? How will you develop yourself? There's a difference between being busy and being productive. There's a big difference. Many of us, we live our lives like what they call the treadmill effect. You know, in treadmill, you run, you're sweating, your back is aching, your muscles are pulling, but you're in the same spot. You get caught in what they call the rut of routine. See, I'm giving you all of these terminologies of the life coaches without charging you top dollar or top pound, right? This is what they talk about, but these are fundamental, these are simple concepts that are there in Shariah. They've just used fancy terminology, the rut of routine and the treadmill effect and all of that. It comes down to the same thing. So I like what one author has written, soul-guided productivity. Soul-guided productivity, meaning productivity with a purpose. You're not just busy. You know why Allah has created you. You know what is your function as an alim. Covey says you start with the end in mind. As a Muslim, we always start at the end in mind because we're working towards akhirah. The whole Quran is telling us that start with the end in mind. The whole Quran is telling us start with the end in mind. So if you know who you are and what's your function in society, then it becomes easy to be productive. Then you find the energy from within yourself. You're self-motivated. Then you self-regulate. You don't need a line manager. You don't need a boss. You don't need a mutawalli to manage you. You're self-motivated and you self-regulate because you know who you are. They say, what is an abd? We use the word slave in English. When we use the word slave, it's a negative connotation. You think of people shackled on a ship from Africa to America. But Abd in Arabic means it is only when you enslave yourself to Allah, then and then only are you truly liberated from everything and everyone else. Until you do not become an abd, until you don't enslave yourself to Allah, you'll be a slave to fashion, to trends, to your trustees, to your wife, to your children, to your passions, to your hobbies. You think you're liberated, but you're not truly liberated, you're a slave. So we've got to unshackle ourselves first as ulama, and then teach the ummah how to unshackle themselves when it comes to skills development. So very quickly, a few things I'll mention. Broad-based reading and engagement is what is required in order for you to be able to unskill yourself. You've got to understand your market. مَنْ لَمْ يَعْرِفْ أَهْلَ زَمَانِهِ فَهُوَ جَاهِلٌ. And how do you understand your market if you don't meet with people, engage with people? You don't read on a broad plethora of topics. You're only reading what is immediately relevant to you. You know, when we do workshops for ulama on public speaking, I say, any alim that has to give a talk on, say, parents, the rights of parents, he's not going to find a new ayah. He's not going to find a new hadith. So what will distinguish his talk from the average talk? The examples that he's able to bring, which are more contemporary and then resonate in light of those ayat and ahadith of the audience that he's speaking to. And those examples can't come if you live your life in a bubble and in a cocoon. When you have broad-based reading, when you know the lingo and the terminologies of others in every other profession. Moulana was asking me on the way here that, you know, how do you better your vocab? So I told him, everybody says you must read, which is obvious, right? But I told him, listen to people in other fields. Ulama will inevitably end up using the same kind of terminologies in the English language when the subject matter is different and when that person's purpose is different. So if you listen to Piers Morgan and George Galloway, the topic is something totally different, right? But the manner in which they use certain words is where you'll be able to learn how to improve your vocabulary, because it's not a different field. But you must be willing to do that in order to upskill yourself. You have to be approachable. That's the second thing. As the Sheikh Shamail, the sharh of it, he said, Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam would intentionally joke with the Sahaba to lower the level of awe and ra'ab that he had, so that they could benefit from the knowledge that he had to impart on them. Today we intentionally increase the level of awe. Main Hazrat hu bhai, you must come half in sajda before you walk into my majlis. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam was intentionally lowering the level of awe, making jokes so that Sahaba could find him more approachable and he could deliver the message. Today, we want to distance ourselves more. Be approachable, but not to the point where you become a mere friend. And there isn't the distinction between an ordinary person and a scholar. Find the balance. The third thing, and I was speaking yesterday about this in the Jummah talk as well, leadership. We all know how to talk. Hey, Maulvis, in South African terminology, they say Maulvis can chun. It's the South African lingo. Maybe Sheikh Zaid would know. But we can't listen. Hey, we're bad listeners. Ask our wives. How many times my wife has caught me up? She's talking. I'm like, gee, what I said? You think I don't know what you said? No, just tell me what I said. We only want to share our views. We don't want to understand somebody else's view. Like I said earlier on, if the giants of fiqh could say we are right with the possibility of being wrong and he is wrong with the possibility of being right, we don't want to even listen. And Allah says, فَاسْتَمِعْ لِمَا يُوحَى. There's a difference between hearing and listening. Listening is the absorption of sound. Hearing is when you listen with heart and mind, with presence of soul. Listen to the man. That will build a connection. You don't have to inevitably agree with him, but listen to people. And you'll be surprised how much you'll end up learning. You have to meet with people. When you meet with people, like I've just given the example, you are able to contextualize. So I'll give you a quick example, right? Listen, I don't watch the Oscars. Let me just put out the qualification or the caveat up front. But last year or the year before, there was this controversy where the MC was Chris Rock, and he made a joke about that one actor, Will Smith's wife, right, about her hair. And he got angry and he gave him a solid right hook, like, kind of Khabib style. So one alim said something amazing, right? Everyone was talking about whether this man was within his rights to defend the honor of his wife, or whether this man was within his rights as a satirist, as a comedian, right? And this alim came from a totally different angle. The same Will Smith and his wife are known to have an open marriage. You know what that means? So the alim said, now he knew this because he follows the news. He said, a man who can tolerate his wife being intimate with another man, all in the name of being progressive, How is it that he can't tolerate another man making a joke about his wife? In that one statement, he totally washed out that concept of an open marriage. He was saying every man at the end of the day has got a ghairah. He can't tolerate his wife being mocked at for her hairstyle. Where can he truly tolerate her being intimate with another man? He's merely saying that. He's claiming that. Now that's the ability of a Maulvi, of a sheikh, to contextualize. You know, somebody said something profound. They said, ulama need to become thought leaders. We can't just regurgitate the obvious. Ye haram hai, this is wrong, this is munkar, this is condemned, this is wrong with society. Who doesn't know that? You need to be thought leaders in terms of solutions. So there's a difference between an alim who leads the congregation 5 times a day and that alim who is consulted by his community and congregation on every issue of the day. Become both, where you lead them 5 times a day and at the same time you can lead them on every issue of the day. But you have to have broad-based reading, broad-based experience and knowledge. You don't have to be an expert in every field. I don't want to make you feel overwhelmed, right? But if your knowledge is broad-based, you can sit on any table and they can be discussing any topic and you'll be able to throw, in South African lingos, they say you'll be able to throw your 5 cents in there. You'll be able to say 1 or 2 things. And people will be, hey, Maulvi knows this also. Talking about economics, you got a thing or two to say. They're talking about sport, you got a thing or two to say, but you don't watch it. You got better things to do with your life. But you know what's happening. You offay with the environment. مَنْ لَمْ يَعْرِفْ أَهْلَ زَمَانِهِ فَهُوَ جَاهِلٌ. Otherwise you can't pitch. You can't contextualize. Everything is getting shorter today. Sometimes they tell me, at work, at radio station, they tell me, only a 60-second clip. I say to make the 60-second clip is more difficult than giving a 60-minute bayan, because what do you reduce it to? In a bayan, you can still meander and eventually get to what you were trying to say if you've got 60 minutes. But if you've got only 60 seconds, you've got to hit the sweet spot from the get-go. That's the world that we live in today. So if you can't hit the sweet spot in terms of contextualizing the issue and the solution, you've missed the boat. They're going to move on to someone else. Then you're going to become jealous of that person. Then you'll delegitimize, stigmatize, demonize, and cancel out that other person because that person makes you feel insecure. In reality, it's not that his ideology is deviant, it's that he has upskilled himself and you haven't. And because he's upskilled himself and you haven't, you're worried about your turf. You worry, because, you know, once a scholar came from abroad and he gave a talk in one masjid. So the imam of that masjid was being criticized. You know, he can lead your musallis astray. He said something remarkable. He said, I'm making imamat here for 30 years. If after 30 years, one scholar can come lead them astray in one Jummah talk, then I haven't done my work for 30 years.
Allah, God.
Why do I have to be so insecure? They say most youth who succumb to deviant ideologies, it is either because they don't have a relationship with an alim or they've had a bad experience with an alim. In the 2 minutes that I have, I'll leave you with this. It's not important. It's not the function of an alim to convey Islam. You've got to promote Islam. I can tell you, if I'm a salesman, I can tell you there's an iPhone, buy it if you want. But it's 2 times the price of the other phone. Or I can convince you to buy this at twice the price, even though you don't need it and you already have 2 phones in your possession. That's a salesman. Today, to condemn a wrong for being a wrong is not adequate. You can't tell people, perform salah, otherwise you go to Jahannam. You've got to convince them that salah is integral for their success in this world and in the year after, to the point that they will perform salah of their own motivation. You can't say this is haram, full stop. You've got to convince them that Allah has made it haram for their own benefit. In order to do that, you've got to read, you've got to upskill yourself. You've got to work at shaping the identity of your community, your congregation, your constituency. The biggest threat today is not the physical onslaught against Islam and Muslims, as bad as it is, because the victim of the physical onslaughts are shaheed and going to Jannah. It's the ideological onslaught. It's the zahni irtidad, the intellectual apostasy. And that, in my humble opinion, is the biggest taqaza and need for ulama. 45 people's sense of identity. We are coconut Muslims. We look Muslim more than our forebears look Muslim on the apparent. But inside we are hollowed out. We are colonized. We are totally detached from the core fundamental values of Islam. And that's where ulama need to come in. And, you know, there's no false dichotomy between dunya and akhirah. Nowhere in the Quran is dunya condemned. Hayatul dunya is condemned. Hayatul dunya is condemned. We need a generation of young men and women in all professions and fields to pursue dunya with excellence, but for the sake of akhirah. This ummah will only rise when we are leaders on every front and independent of others. Today we can't move forward despite our numbers, because we are totally dependent on others in every field. I'll leave you with this incident. It's a famous incident that I've heard many of my asatiz are mentioning. It's the incident of Ibrahim bin Adham and Shaqiq Balkhi, who were two contemporaries. So one day Ibrahim bin Adham asked Shaqiq Balkhi, tell me, what was the defining moment in your life where you decided to dedicate yourself to ibadah? He was a zahid, total ascetic. So Shaqiq Balkhi told him, one day I saw a crippled bird that was blind. And I thought to myself, this bird is crippled and it's blind. How will it ever find sustenance? It won't be long before this bird will die. And there I saw an able bird come with food in its beak and put it into the beak of the bird that was crippled and blind. And I thought, well, if Allah is taking care of the sustenance of this blind, crippled bird, I am from Ashraful Makhluqat, Allah will take care of my sustenance. So Ibrahim bin Adham smiled at him and said, you took a good lesson from the crippled bird. If only you took the greater lesson from the able bird and took a resolution to dedicate the rest of your life to serving humanity. Kuntum khayra ummatin ukhrijat linnas. I was reading on the plane the Malfuzat of Mufti Ahmad Khan Puri Sahib when he was speaking to ulama, and the opening point that he made will be my closing point. He said, the day you graduate as an alim, you have no say over your life, you belong to the ummah. You have no say over your life, you have now an ilmi status. You are an asset of the community. May Allah make us all true assets of the community in this world as well as in the after. Wa sallallahu wa sallam wa baraka ala nabiyina Muhammad.